Time is running out for Illinois lawmakers to craft a bipartisan solution to the state's financial crisis, and the Springfield rumor mill is, well, working overtime. I'm Jack Titchener along with Amanda Vinicky of Illinois Public Radio. Amanda, you've done a terrific job teasing out some of the details of what may be a House Democratic budget solution here in the last days of the spring session.
What we're hearing is that Democrats are going to craft a budget that they call a maintenance budget. Basically, that means that it maintains what exists now. That said, of course, it will have some cuts. That way they can make the argument that they did some of the tough decision making that you've heard so much about that voters seem to want. And at the same time, it appears as if they will give more money to education. That's something that Governor Bruce Rauner wants. Education, I should point out, not higher education. That'd be an additional funding for, say, preschool through high school. That is what we're hearing. Who knows? We haven't seen any bills yet at this point, but that's the conjecture.
It's a hot topic of conversation here, and this has been done before. The House has moved budgets and said, hey, we've done it. We did the best we could. Now you have to react to it. You have to respond to it.
So that's really what this sets up, because of course what needs to be pointed out is that Illinois no longer has the same revenue as it did this year. So if you're maintaining spending at about the same level with a whole lot less money, that could, some say, bring about an unbalanced budget. They're basically tossing it to Governor Bruce Rauner to make some decisions. The legislature saying that we've given you our guidance, that's our job. Now it's your job as the CEO of the state to make it work.
And you mentioned the unbalance. The revenues on hand would be somewhere around $32 billion, but to a maintenance budget would be upwards of what, 36, 37 billion?
Exactly. And it's hard to tell right now because we don't actually have those numbers, but we know vaguely. I mean, an income tax hike rolls back, you're missing chunks and chunks of dollars, about $4 billion in fact.
And there are all kinds of ideas floating around up here, like taxing retirement income, expanding the sales tax base of the state to include services, all kinds of things like that, but it's all conjecture at this point.
Well, it is, because basically you have Governor Bruce Rauner saying that I'm not going to look at service taxes, retirement tax, anything, you name it, unless his turnaround agenda gets passed. That's, the workers' comp, lawsuit limits, right to work zones. And we've seen, however, in the House that those votes aren't working. The Democrats and Republicans voting present are saying no to all of this. So Rauner's holding up the budget for his plan. Democrats are saying, no, you need to focus. The budget is the big deal. We have until May 31st. Get her done. And
the governor has said in an op-ed piece out this morning that, look, I still need these reforms to make Illinois competitive, and I'm not budging, right? Basically.
Oh, basically. More than basically, yeah. I mean, he says it outright.
And this is going to be an extra long session, to use his words.
An extra long session, not an overtime one, which is what we typically call it. But you have Governor really going into, it sounds like he was, when he was a candidate, calling the legislature and saying, we have all of these, it's all about protecting incumbents, special interest deals, and hammering down on the legislators, it seems, as the bad guy. I've already had one representative refer to Rauner as having Blagojevich-like tactics, in dealing with the General Assembly. And
that kind of rhetoric at this stage of the game, not a good sign for anybody.
Not a good sign for anybody at all. Governor has spent so much time really meeting with legislators, taking them to the mansion, trying to play nice, he says, and yet legislators say that isn't true. Democratic legislators, that is, I should point out. They say he wants my way or the highway. It's not actually a conversation. He's preaching to us, and we're co-equal branches of government. We're not going to take it.
So in short, even if a budget is run, so to speak, the governor basically could veto the whole thing outright.
Right.
He could go through and line item veto. So it basically sets up the stage for an extra long session, as he says.
It really does. And the big question will be, when do they come back and address the revenue component, or will Governor Bruce Rauner go ahead and line item veto, basically reduce the budget by all of the amounts in his introduced budget? That would be huge. I mean, these cuts aren't just little nips and tucks. It's a major overhaul.
Like $1.5 billion for Medicaid, for example, and on and on and on down the line.
Exactly.
Into lots of different individual programs. Amanda Vinicky, thanks for bringing us up to date on it. We really appreciate it. Up next on the program, we'll have a conversation with a pair of the House and Senate's top budget negotiators and see what they have to say about this. two of their party's top budget experts join us now on Illinois Lawmakers, Senate Appropriations Committee 1 Chairwoman, Democrat Heather Steans of Chicago, and Deputy House Republican Leader Patti Bellock of Hinsdale, the GOP spokeswoman on the Human Services Appropriations Committee in the House and on the House Budget Oversight Panel. As we head into the last few days of this legislative session, it looks like there's a head-on collision between the governor and what he wants in terms of his turnaround agenda and what the Democrats in the chambers here will permit. So there's a rumor that the House Democrats right now, even as we speak, are getting ready to run a budget of their own next week. Is that what you're hearing, Representative Bellock?
Yes, Jack, that is what we're hearing. So we've been working together, especially Heather and I. We've been in several work groups together, and so we were hoping to come to some solutions through those work groups. But it sounds as though the House Democrats, especially, are working on a budget. So we'll be anxious to see what comes out of that.
Senator?
Well, I serve on 2 work groups with Patti, and I think we've been having real conversations and discussions. I think we could probably come to agreement on a budget.
I think you two probably could.
Right.
And I'm remaining optimistic that we'll get there. There are things outside of the budget that I think are coming into play, and I'm not on those work groups, but I'm remaining optimistic that maybe we can get to some big agreement by the time we get out of here.
The governor this morning in an op-ed piece in the local State Journal Register newspaper here said he's still willing to engage. He wants to talk about things, but there are things in his turnaround agenda he feels are absolutely necessary for the state to move forward, things that like workers' compensation reform, right-to-work zones, and property tax freezes. These are non-starters with the Democrats.
Well, they've been in the working groups, and I think that there's been a lot of discussion, but so far the working groups have not brought forth any real solutions to all of us. So we're going to have to keep working on that. But the governor has said that he will look at compromise. He will look at working with the Democrats. But he's been consistent on the message of major reform tied to any other solutions to the budget, like revenue or whatever else.
Senator, a lot of those things are basically non-starters on your side of the aisle, particularly the workers' compensation reform. Causation is something that there have been up and down votes on that here in the House of Representatives, not on the exact language of what the governor has proposed, but it seems like there's a clear signal been sent here that these things aren't going anywhere.
Well, I definitely think there's ongoing negotiations. What I've heard from my colleagues on the Senate Dems who are serving on that committee is that there have been good conversations and they thought they were making some progress. So, I do think there's places that they can get to an agreement. I think generally speaking, what probably needs to happen is the governor and the leaders need to sort of come to an agreement around where are they going to do compromises and where are they not. Should that come together, I think the working groups can in quick order come to some real suggestions and real language. I don't know where we have that overall agreement reached yet, though, and I'm really hoping that comes to fruition yet within the next week or two.
If the Democrats here in the House run a budget, it won't have, as far as we know, the revenues to back it up. It would be sort of a temporary, what lawmakers call a maintenance budget. There would be some cuts in it, but it wouldn't last for very long.
No. And this year is different, Jack, because that budget is going to have to go to the governor's desk. And so probably the governor would veto a budget like that, and then we'll be back here. So I guess what Heather was saying, what we'd rather see happen is that there would be those negotiations now in the next 2 weeks, because people's lives are at stake. There's providers that their groups are at stake. There's the child care workers. There's all those different groups, all the disabled groups that are relying on this budget and what's going to come out of it, because they're hoping that, there are going to be some solutions in it.
I know that both of you are intimately aware of what goes on, particularly in the Medicaid budget, because you've both been experts on that, and so there's a lot of concern about what could happen.
There is. The governor's proposed budget decreases the Medicaid budget $1.5 billion. Now, this is on top of, we've already done $1.2 billion reductions to the program. So I think it's highly difficult to expect that we can really achieve those kind of budgets without really throwing people out in the streets. Mental health funding is decimated in the proposed budget. Funding to developmental disability kids we're increasing the determination of need scores so people could no longer get services either in the community or in nursing facilities. I think there's real problems, and I think that it was shown when they put that budget up on the board in the House, it couldn't get passed as it was. I think the governor's proposed budget also really wasn't balanced, as we've seen, particularly with the Supreme Court decision that came out recently saying, you got to fund the pensions. And the proposed budget had $2.2 billion of savings from pensions, which just is not achievable. So I think we've got a reality that the current budget as is, under current revenues with a temporary tax increase going away, just is not sustainable. So we have a problem.
You're about at a $31 billion budget without that temporary tax increase still in there. And as you indicated, the pensions part of that's about $7 billion. So there's all this incredible pressure on it. What are some of the things that there's quite a bit of tools in the toolbox in terms of raising revenues around here. You could go back to raising the income tax back another percent. That's like $3 billion right there. There's kind of some strange bedfellows this week. The Center for Taxes and Accountability and the Taxpayers Federation have put out a joint report, and usually that's dogs and cats living together, But they're talking about expanding the service, the taxes on services in the state a lot more broadly than perhaps Governor Rauner has indicated. But there's another $2 billion there that could be found.
Well, they've, with everything, as the governor said in the beginning, as he said with his budget, that he was open to compromise. I mean, that budget was, put out a couple months ago, and so I think people are looking towards compromise on that. But bottom line with that is there are a lot of issues with that. They've shown that states like Iowa have brought in $3 to $4 billion on their service tax. But again, some people were in my office today saying, but Iowa isn't like Illinois. We have a lot of associations here, and how does that work with the service tax with associations? So sometimes there can be unintended consequences, and when you're looking at major issues like that, which Republicans have never been a part of that discussion as much before, but are open to that now, that we're going to have to look at everything that's been put on the table.
And we really do have an antiquated tax structure here. When you look at what's the growing part of the economy, it's now a sales economy, not a goods economy, manufacturing economy, yet we don't tax services. An aging economy, yet we're one of only 3 states who don't tax any retirement income, even if you exclude low income, and Social Security income. It's becoming a much more, I think, really problematic and income inequality economy too, or the wealthier where the income is growing, not at the lower income. Yet we have no way of doing any graduation of our tax increase by state constitution. So we have a tax system that does not keep pace with where our economy is going.
You mentioned taxing retirement income. A lot of states do that, and one proposal that's floating around here would tax retirement income over $50,000 a year. That would raise another $1.5 billion in new revenues. Is that going anywhere?
Well, so far, we haven't discussed it at all, and my concerns about that is, that there will be a lot of opposition to that from people who are not the wealthier people who are moving out of the state and going to other things, that they're here and that now all of a sudden they're retiring and there's going to be an extra tax on them. But as I said, everybody is willing to look at everything on the table because they realize that, we have the huge unfunded liabilities, we have the problems with the pensions, we need major reform, and we need to look at everything that is going by us right now.
What about removing the sales tax or the current exemption on sales taxes on food and medicine? That's something the Civic Federation group has put out there. That's $1.5 billion.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think everything's getting looked at. I think there's that's challenging that may disproportionately impact lower income folks, and we already have a highly regressive tax structure in the state. But as Patti said, I think we're sort of looking at everything. We know right now that we do have a very imbalanced situation, and we're going to have to put everything on the table.
Well, another thing that I've heard about, I hear a lot about this from folks in the Green Party, that they really like an idea that Representative Mary Flowers has over here in the House about taxing individual transactions on the Chicago Board of Trade.
That's interesting.
You're not buying into that.
Well, the bottom line is, Jack, is that at the same time, the main thing that I believe that a lot of people believe is that in order to get Illinois back on a strong fiscal footing, we need to bring jobs back to Illinois. We need to, bring businesses back to Illinois. So I'm trying to be very careful in what we're looking at in this, that we're not putting undue burden on businesses to drive more businesses out, because the outward migration, we're the 3rd highest in the United States of people moving out of Illinois. So you have to look at that also.
And I'd just like to make the point too, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, that I think the biggest driver and concern people have in the state of Illinois is we don't have fiscal stability. It's that uncertainty. People need certainty. So I think in whatever we come to an agreement on here needs to, for over some period of time, assure people that we have a plan. We have an ability to actually solve our fiscal problems and create stability here for some period of time into the future. That's really the goal.
One last quick question. Is anybody making summer vacation plans?
No.
We hope we get some time.
Right.
We do hope we get to agreement.
Senator Steans, Representative Bellock, thanks very much for joining us. Up next on Illinois Lawmakers. Lawmakers may not agree just yet on how to fix the budget, but they are making some progress on a bipartisan plan to do law enforcement reform here in the state of Illinois. Illinois lawmakers are hard at work fine-tuning a package of law enforcement reforms here at the Capitol. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in depth with two of the key sponsors of that, Democratic State Representative Elgie Sims Jr. of Chicago and Republican State Senator Tim Bivins of Dixon. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having us, Jack.
We're, of course, very familiar with what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, and New York City in terms of excessive use of force. But this, and as I understand it, kind of came about as a result of a court ruling on an eavesdropping law that was passed here about keeping citizens from taping police officers in the line of work. Is that the way that this kind of got going?
Jack, and I think all of those things played a role. And what we're trying to do, body cams in particular, they're a tool. They can be a tool used not only for the general public, but for police. And where you see them in production and where you see them in use, you see reduction in complaints against the police. When folks understand that they're being taped, the interaction between the police and the public, they're a lot more professional. And the public, they react differently when they understand, they know they're being taped. And the police officers, they want what we've heard, Tim and we've heard from police and all the interested parties. The police officers, they generally want to show the good work that they're doing. And we want to help them by putting the body cams in place.
Senator Bivins, you're a former sheriff. You know about this kind of thing firsthand. Is this a valuable tool in terms of what law enforcement can bring to the table now?
Definitely. We've used the video car cams for years, and when I left, we were still using the VHS tapes. So it's been a while, but now with the digital technology, it's even improved. There's more storage. It's better quality. And this is something that can protect the officer, the citizen. If there's a complaint, we can look at the tape immediately to see what has transpired. And that had happened when I was sheriff. We had a complaint on a deputy, and we reviewed the video, and the video showed a textbook traffic stop, very polite, and we couldn't understand a complaint until we called the gentleman back. And so, what was the complaint? We watched the video, and he said, "Oh, there's a video?" And he says, "Never mind."
Well, there's a recent study out from I believe in Rialto, California, where the use of police-worn body cams has resulted in a 60% reduction in excessive use of force complaints.
Absolutely.
and actual use of force complaints.
Right.
So the data seems to be driving this as well.
Absolutely. Well, and again, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing from the police officers they have the use of the body cameras. You see that the reports that are coming in, they're very different. When individuals understand that they are being recorded, you're seeing a difference in the interaction between them. And we've watched some of these videos. We've looked at the technology, so we know how it operates.
So this bill, as it takes shape, this issues some standard operating procedures for how these things work. It also comes up with a way of funding these cameras for local law enforcement. Could you guys go into a little bit more on that?
Sure. There are a number of municipalities that are already using body cameras. The city of Chicago had a pilot program. There are a number of municipalities, including in my district, that are using them with great success. So what we're trying to do is we want to make sure we put in some standard protocols across the state. So if you're going to use body cameras, we're not looking to mandate that individuals use body cameras, but if you're going to use body cameras, we want to set up protocols in place where the use is consistent across the state. Everybody understands that when they should be used and when they shouldn't be used. when they're turned on, when they're not turned off, or when they're turned off, we want to protect victims' rights to make sure that if a victim does not wish to be on camera, we want to make sure that they're being protected. For a witness who is fears for their safety or something like, or does not wish to be taped, we want to make sure we're protecting them as well. And then from the funding standpoint, we've looked at a couple of different options. The federal government is looking at making some funds available, but we don't want to rely on that only. So what we're looking at is increasing traffic tickets to make sure that that money goes into a fund, and then we put in language in the bill, or we're putting language in the bill that will not allow those funds to be swept. So that money goes for the body cameras. We don't want that money to be used for something else.
Sheriff, Senator, Sheriff.
It works.
Well, one of the things, I was talking to a judge the other night, though, who had some concerns about this. He said, well, how is this going to work if there's human error involved? Because even really great technology, redundant technology, can sometimes mess up. What if I have a case that comes up before me where the video, it just isn't there? What do I do?
Within the bill, and we talked about this in committee, that there's a reporting requirement. As soon as you know that there's a malfunction, you need to report that as an officer. So hopefully, normally police officers before their shift, they check their equipment, whether it be a radar gun, a camera, whatever it is, they check it for accuracy, that things are working appropriately. So I think departmental policy, each agency will probably take care of that through policy, is about checking their equipment and making sure things are, but it is technology, things do happen. And that's very possible. You're not going to totally eliminate the technological errors or the human errors, but I think you can minimize them, and I think that's what some of this legislation does, is minimize that.
There's another component to this, and this has to do with police and community relations. It mandates independent investigations of officer-related deaths. It sends the investigation reports to the state's attorney's offices, and if the result of the case is that the the officer's not indicted or prosecuted, that there is disclosure of what was in the report to the public.
That's right. Well, what we're trying to do, obviously, we want to make sure that the public understands and they buy into the decisions that are being made. And part of the problems you're seeing and the lessons we learned, particularly from Ferguson, the reasons why there was such a visceral response in Ferguson is because there was no response from law enforcement. For days and days and days, there was no response. So we want to make sure that, one, there is independence to the investigation. So that individuals understand that it's not just a wall of blue and police protecting police, but there are independent, objective eyes on this, looking at it, and so that if there's a decision not to indict, then you release the report so that the public can see, because we want the public to have confidence in the process. We believe that transparency breeds confidence.
And there's also a Uniform Crime Reporting Act that goes along with this, so that there's a standardized form that everybody has to follow, so that the data goes to the state police. It can be reviewed. Correct?
It's pretty much what's being done already, and it's codifying also the fact that on the independent investigations, that's something most all agencies do now. If you have a shooting incident or a major incident, they're usually calling other agencies to investigate that, other investigators to take on that investigation. So that's basically just making it law what's already in practice.
What about increased use of force training for police officers? That's one of the ideas that's under discussion.
No, absolutely. Well, and not just use of force, but we want to look at cultural bias and cultural sensitivity. We're looking at use of law, what changes in law. What the bill will really look at is expanding how we're training our officers. We've got some fantastic officers out there. We want to make sure that they've got the training necessary to get the job done even better than they're doing it already. So we're focused a lot on training in this legislation.
And there's another bill that you're both on, and that has to do with increased use of training for dealing with people who may be mentally impaired. This comes from a terrible experience that one of your colleagues had in their family.
Absolutely, and we're trying to make sure that individuals and officers are trained in dealing with different situations. And the sheriff and senator, he's got some great experiences that he shared with the group about what's going on, what he's witnessed over the years, and we're trying to make sure we codify that and put that in the statute.
The mental health issue is something I don't think as a society that we've really dealt with very well. We have people who sit in county jails that have mental illness that don't belong in a county jail, but they've been charged with minor crimes, but there's no beds available. So it could be a funding issue and increasing our beds, but they'll sit there for months at a time, and this is something we've been dealing with for the 3 decades that I was in law enforcement, still today. And I had recently had a discussion with one of the staff with the governor's office, said this has to get fixed. We cannot continue this way. We got to get these people help. They're not getting the appropriate help they need in jail. They need treatment. They don't need to be sitting in jail. So this is something that is at the forefront and should remain there.
And you see that, recognition of that, even recently, Cook County Sheriff appointed a mental health professional to run the county jail. So folks understand that we've got a lot of mental health issues we've got to deal with, particularly in law enforcement.
And Sheriff Dart, of course, comes out of the legislative experience.
He
was a
does.
state representative.
He was a member of this august body.
Representative Sims, Senator Bivins, thanks very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. A great issue, and it looks like you're making some real progress with it. We will be back next week with another edition of Illinois Lawmakers as we continue our coverage of the Illinois General Assembly during the month of May. From all of us at Illinois Lawmakers, so long from Springfield.